God bless all of you this afternoon. I'm grateful to be here with another clergy conversation. And today I'm extremely happy and excited to be interviewing one of God's greatest preachers and pastors and powerful voices, and one that all of us around the country know, admire, and respect. The proud pastor of the Fellowship Bible Baptist Church of Warner Robins, Georgia, Dr. Tolan Morgan is with us. Dr. Morgan, thank you for being with us on today.
Man, the honor is mine, Pastor Brown. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate your regard, man.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us your background when you came to know Christ. Just give us a little bit about your background.
Um, Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Um, Spent the first 40 years of my life there.
Yes, sir.
Um, Pastor's kid. My mom and dad raised me in the fear and knowledge of the Lord. Met the Lord at an early age, about 9 years old. Confessed my faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And man, was a typical PK. Like, I did everything in the church except be on the mother's board, and that was because I wasn't a woman. so, whatever I was assigned to do,
Yes, sir.
I did. And in my teenage years, um, I developed my acumen for music. So I was the minister of music at my dad's church from age 15 to 26,
Yes, sir.
11 years, and served there. And then I accepted my call to ministry in 1997.
Yes, sir.
Preached my first sermon in August of 1997. Um, Got married in 1999. Was called to my first church in 2001. And stayed there for 14 years at the New St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church there in Detroit. And in 2015, the Lord saw fit to move me to the Fellowship Bible Baptist Church in Warner Robins, Georgia, where my wife and I and our children have been for the last 9 years.
Yes, sir.
So that's pretty much been the summation of my journey. Um, I would say that the Lord was fast tracking me, but He has been faithful.
Yes, sir.
He has been faithful. I often tell people I don't know if God is faithful to me.
Yes, sir.
What I do know is that God is faithful to His word concerning me.
Yes, sir.
So whatever He has preordained for my life and decided for my life, He has remained faithful, and I'm thankful to Him for it.
Yes, sir. So, as you were growing up in Detroit, because Detroit has had a strong history of preaching,
Absolutely.
music.
Absolutely.
My father's actually from Detroit
Okay.
as well. Just talk to us about growing up in Detroit. Who were some of your preaching heroes in Detroit, even some of your musical heroes? I mean, it's such a widespread, but talk
Yeah.
to us just about the church climate growing up in Detroit.
Oh man. Growing up in Detroit in the 80s and 90s, man, it it was very honestly, it was a preacher's heaven and a musician's heaven,
Yes, sir.
because Detroit had the best of both worlds.
Yes, sir.
So, from a preaching perspective, my influences growing up was my father. My father was a good preacher, strong, had longevity, uh, was called to a church, uh, grew that church, built a new building, all within a 35-year period. And my dad taught me about what it means to be a preacher and not just how it sounds to be a preacher. And I am a direct derivative of his influence, not just biologically, but spiritually. He and my mother was a wonderful woman of God, just training me up in the ways of the Lord and allowing me to be me, me to be a young man, allowing me to experience some youthful virtues and vicissitudes. I grew up with a little balance,
Yes, sir.
a little balance. But he was my primary influence for preaching. Outside of my dad, there were guys in Detroit like E.L. Branch, Edgar Van, Tellis Chapman, S.L. Jones, Dr. Charles Adams, Dr. James Perkins, these stellar generals in the faith who were stalwarts for their preaching gifts and their teaching and their influence in the body of Christ. I came along during their time, and I'm thankful for the investment and the impartation that a lot of those guys, some of those guys, had into my life directly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so when you're talking about that, I think that's important, because as we grow, even as young preachers, young pastors, to have those sages in our lives, because they have experienced the things we have not experienced. So as you continue to say that, you mentioned some heavy hitters that are revered even now, still, even some who are still alive, some who have passed on, but they're still revered because of the depth of their preaching, the way they conducted themselves. And so as you think about that, how, when you were getting ready to start your first sermon, what did you take from these guys that helped you along your own ministerial journey, even still now? What were some of those things that you observed or noticed, especially even starting with your father, what you said with your father, but also the other ones as well? What were some of the key things that you saw that helped you?
Well, there was one common denominator that I saw amongst all of these guys, and that was an honest attempt at handling the Word of God responsibly.
Yes, sir.
With those that I named in particular, and this is no knock against anybody else, but I was exposed to these guys.
Absolutely.
And the common thread amongst them was an honest attempt to handle the Word of God responsibly. Style varies, gift varies, personality varies.
Yes, sir.
But the common denominator was an honest, consistent attempt to handle the Word of God responsibly. And so that's what I drew from with all of those who had direct influence into my life from a preaching perspective.
Yes, sir. And so when did you feel the call on your life?
Oh man, I was a kid. I was a kid, man. I've been wrestling. I had been wrestling with my cause since I was a kid, man.
Yes, sir.
I was in the backyard. I've said this when the pandemic hit, um, we were all trying to adjust, right?
Right. Yes,
We were
sir.
all trying to adjust to, preaching to a camera with nobody in the sanctuary, not really knowing what's happening on the other end of the camera. And the truth be told, um, it was my resolve that, before I was preaching to somebody, I was preaching to nobody.
Right. Yes, sir.
I had my invisible audience when I was a kid. There was nobody saying amen. There was nobody responding. I was preaching to nobody before I was preaching to somebody.
Right. Yes, sir.
So, navigating and managing through the pandemic took me back to those when I was a kid and I had my invisible audience and I had my makeshift microphone and Doc, I was going at it. so this was nothing new. I was preaching to nobody before I was preaching to somebody. So yeah, I have been bitten by that bug, as a kid, man. And all of my, shall I call them, excursions into my youthfulness, whether
Yeah.
it was basketball, whether it was girls, whether it was hanging out, whatever it was, some way or another, it didn't let me go too far
Yeah.
away from what I knew was God's call on my life.
And I think, Dr. Morgan, you said something that's very key, the last part, the balance.
Mhm.
Because a lot of preachers and pastors that I've listened to who started young said that was the struggle for them is because they weren't able to, in a sense, still be a kid because
Right.
in trying to be a kid, there was this judgmental piece that
Yeah.
was attached to them. Like, well, where some say I want to play basketball, do this and do that, but I couldn't necessarily do that. One of my favorite preachers and mentors, Dr. Timothy Flynn from Atlanta, he tells this story. He tells this in his biography where he says he wanted to do this and try to do this, but because of the judgmental side of
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
it in a sense it restricted him and kind of made him feel like I can't really be myself. So
Yeah.
what you're saying is so true, and I think that there are others who even now still struggle with this balance of
Mhm.
whether I'm a kid or young person, but still trying to have some sort of life, but also, as you say, not going too far with
Yeah.
it on the same, plateau.
Yeah. I knew the call of God was on my life as a kid, but I didn't preach my first sermon until I was 22 years old.
Yes, sir.
So I had, I had time to be a young man. I had
Absolutely.
time to be a kid. And, I didn't have the type of parents that was forcing me to go to school in a suit and tie. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes,
You
sir.
know, they allowed me to be a boy before I was a preacher. They
Yes, sir.
allowed me to be a young man before I was a preacher.
Yes, sir.
And in retrospect, I'm most appreciative of that because if we can be honest,
Mm-hmm.
um, the average person doesn't know what to do with a boy preacher,
Mm, mm.
let alone a grown preacher.
Right. Absolutely.
The average person cannot deal with the both of you.
Mm.
They either if they can deal with Pastor Brown, they don't want to deal with or can't deal with G Chris.
Yes, sir.
And if they dealing with G Chris, they can't handle Pastor Brown.
Yes, sir.
The average person cannot deal with the both of you.
Mm.
So just imagine if you're a kid.
Absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
what do we really do with a boy preacher?
Mm-hmm.
Do we do we do we restrain them to keep them quote unquote on the straight and narrow path because they're a preacher, or do we give them some room to be a boy or girl, as a young person,
Mm-hmm.
at the risk of how far do we take that? How far do
Mm-hmm.
we go with their humanity?
Absolutely.
So, that's always not a clear cut
Mm-hmm.
um, approach. So balance becomes the key, and preferably somebody like that has a parent or a guardian or someone in their lives that can at least help them through that, to
Right.
give them some liberty while trying to find the place of limitations
Yes, sir.
to fulfill the call of God on their lives.
Yes, sir. So you said you started preaching at 22, but you also made mention of your musical gifts as well, serving on what your dad is with music as well. And I want you to help us with that too, because there are a lot of, we're gonna get to the first sermon in pastoring, but there are a lot of people who have that struggle as well, that
Sure.
they are preachers, but they're also musicians, and sometimes of the struggle of finding, that struggle of being preacher or musician. Or sometimes people feel like they want to hear you play but don't want to give you an opportunity to preach.
Mhm.
Were those any of your struggles, or how can, or help those who have that struggle on how to really, operate in both gifts but not in a sense losing themselves?
Well, the first thing we got to be clear about is that we've got to stop associating somebody who has a gifted voice
Hmm.
with the association of them being a preacher.
Wow. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There are a lot of people with gifted voices.
Yes, sir.
They got a symphony stuck in their throat,
Yes, sir.
and we presume or impose upon them that just because they're vocally gifted, that they will fit well in the shoes of a preacher. That's the
Hmm.
first thing.
Yes, sir.
The second thing is, if a person is clear on their call from God to walk in the office of a preacher, then you will always be intentional about prioritizing your calling over your gift.
Yes, sir.
Music is a gift, but it's not my calling.
Yes, sir.
So I had to prioritize my calling over my gift. And
Yes,
let me
sir.
be very clear. More often than not, everybody is musically inclined,
Hmm.
but not everybody is musically informed.
Yes, sir.
Uh, if you listen to anybody, if you just listen to a crowd of people who don't know each other, they strike out and start singing the happy birthday song. They gonna harmonize, or they all gonna catch on to the melody, and they don't even know each other.
Right.
They just don't know what key they're singing in.
Right.
so, so everybody is musically inclined, but not everybody is musically informed.
Hmm.
So when it comes to our programming as a people, if you're clear that you've been called to the office of a preacher, you prioritize your calling over your gift. You don't lose your gift. You just prioritize your calling over your gift. And for me, um, I was very serious about being a preacher.
Yes, sir.
I didn't want to be a musician trying to preach.
Mm.
I wanted to be a preacher trying to play.
Wow. Yes, sir. Yes,
You
sir.
understand the difference?
Absolutely.
There are a lot of musicians who are trying to preach, but they're not preachers who can play.
Mm.
And for me, I wanted to be a preacher who could play and not a
Yes, sir.
musician trying to preach.
Yes, sir.
And so I just didn't want to be in that category. I didn't want to be in that category.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to be serious. I wanted to be taken seriously in my preaching ministry. And that started with me taking my preaching ministry seriously
Yes,
and
sir.
doing everything that I needed to do in my own eyes to quote unquote consider myself legit, viable, and serious about the preaching ministry and all that goes into the work of preaching.
Yes, sir.
Past the shoes, the suit, the robe, all of the bells and whistles, past the gifting, the work of preaching is a work of preparation. And I just wanted to be taken seriously in that area. So I had to take myself seriously.
Yes, sir. Well, I was going to ask that later, but you just started on it, so just keep on going. Talk about the work, even now. Help us all. The work of preaching, the preparation, how to grow in preaching. Just go ahead.
Well, let me first of all be a little controversial and take all the spirituality out of it.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna presume you pray, you know, you fast, you got the Holy Ghost. Oh, okay, all right. You
Yeah.
know Jesus, you know, all you got all that. We're
The
gonna take
cliche
out
stuff. The
we're
cliche
gonna
stuff.
take out all the spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's talk about the practice of preparation.
Let's talk about it. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Dr. Moore.
So, reading a passage repetitively before you write anything, before you make any notes, just repetitive reading of the passage. Familiarizing yourself with the context of the passage. What happened before it and where is it leading to? Because the Bible really is just one big long narrative.
Yes, sir.
Right? Word study. Greek and Hebrew, nouns, pronouns, proper names, verbs, adverbs, weird words in there, all of that. And all of the nuances of biblical language study, right? The aim, the author's intended message. Not just what is this story about, what is this book about?
Mm.
Why is this story in this book?
Yes, sir.
Because the story is in this book to support whatever the book is about.
Yes, sir.
The author's intended message, the aim. Who wrote it? Who did they write it to? And what did they write it for?
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, looking at your historical homework of culture, customs, government, all of that. This is the Bible is a real historic book, so there are real life human horizons to investigate. Doing all of that work, you know, looking possibly at some comparative interpretations of the passage with the understanding and the presupposition that when you get up to speak and preach, you're not about to say something new. You're not about to say something that hasn't already been either identified or or hinted at in the passage. Humanity has been working on the Bible since humanity started.
Yes, sir.
People have been working on this book that we can't even put a number to.
Absolutely.
We'll never know. Scholars and theologians and professors and preachers and pastors and church people, even non-believers, they've been working on this book.
Facts.
So you're not about to get up with some grandiose insight on the scripture that nobody's ever said or seen before. Because the truth of the matter is, we're supposed to be saying what's already been said.
Yes, sir.
The only thing that may be new is your audience. So it's new to your audience, but it's not new to the Bible.
Wow.
And so once you get done doing all of that exegetical work on a passage, and now you're prayerfully cutting and pasting, organizing sermon structure, working through to make sure it is not only sound, but it is supported.
Yes, sir.
And that it is confirmed. I like to have a rule for sermon structure, and that in that every sermon that I try to write has to conform to two rules: the character of God and doctrine.
Yes, sir.
If any point of my sermon is in conflict with the character of God as he has revealed it to us and doctrine, then my sermon is wrong.
Yes, sir.
And I try not to just intentionally preach a wrong sermon.
Yes, sir.
So those are the two rulers. When I finish a sermon, I'm going to line that sermon up against the character of God as he has revealed it to us, and doctrine and Christian doctrine. It's as simple as saying, Pastor Brown, any building that is built, it may have a different design, it may have a different floor plan, it may have different material, and it may have a different designer, an architect, but it's still got to pass code.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Am I making sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It could be a cylinder, it can be a square, it can be a rectangle, it can be a half of an arch, but it's still got to pass code.
Yes, sir.
Still got to pass code. So when we get done, if this sermon is a textual sermon, if it's topical, if it's an outline, it's still got to pass code.
It's still got to pass code.
It's still got to pass code. Because if it doesn't pass code, it's in violation. And so working through all of that and taking all of that work seriously.
Yes, sir.
I think the common denominator amongst all preachers is laziness. What's your work ethic?
Wow.
I think we all have the same Bible, the same Holy Ghost, the same Jesus, same God. We're essentially in the same church. The difference is work ethic, laziness. And I think that is that's the difference. And we all see it. If you're involved in any type of sport, the athletes that excel are the ones that have a different work ethic than others.
Right.
It differentiates them. So that's the practicality in the preparation of how serious are you about doing the work of preaching versus the personality, the presentation. Is it sound or does it just sound good?
Mm. Mm. Wow. Wow.
And if you're putting in the work, you're doing the homework, you're putting in the labor, you're more concerned about it being sound than you are about it being sounding good.
Right. Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Woo.
Bless you, man.
No. I mean, we all need to hear that. And from comments already, you're definitely helping us, which I know you will throughout this conversation. But that's powerful, just of itself. Is that are we doing the work? How
Right.
is our work ethic? So, talk to us about when you preach your first sermon. What was the name of it? What was the text? And then were you getting opportunities afterwards? So, talk to us about the start of your ministerial journey.
My first sermon was trash, bro. It was trash, bro. so my very first sermon, August the 24th, 1997. I've been preaching now for 27 years. Luke chapter 1, verse 80. The name of the sermon was Grow Up and Show Up. Talked about how John the Baptist was in the wilderness till he grew in the nature of the Lord. And I talked about grow up and show up. My initial sermon, it was a church loaded with people. And people had sort of anticipated that this was coming eventually at some point. So by the time I preached my first sermon, I had already graduated from college.
Yes, sir.
And went through middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school, college. And I waited till after college and, did my first sermon. Some would tell you they would totally disagree with what I just said, that my first sermon was trash. But that's me. Some of the pastors that were there, they would tell you something different. They would tell you something different. But I humbly tell you, looking back on that, my pastor now, he used to tell me, he said, man, you should go back and preach your first sermon every 5 years
Mm.
to see where have you grown, if you've grown.
Wow.
At least every 5 years, if you go back and preach it or go back and review it to see how you've developed, to see how you've grown. And I took that to heart. Now, I don't preach my first sermon every 5 years, but I have gone back. I think I've preached it once or twice over the last 27 years. And that was my first sermon. And I did. I'll say this too, man. I had a little advantage because I was teaching Bible study
Okay.
at my dad's church around 16 years old, like the main Bible study.
Wow. Okay.
And I wasn't a preacher. So I had been, my spirit and my mind had been acclimated
Yes, sir.
to the work of preparing a biblical lesson
Yes, sir.
about 6 years prior
Okay.
to me preaching my first sermon.
Wow. Yes, sir.
So it may have come out better than normal because I had that time. I had 6 years of having to prepare a biblical lesson to teach to a church full of people. Mind you, I'm a teenager now, and my audience was adults.
Mm.
And I wasn't a preacher.
Mm.
Let's just say I wasn't a legitimate
Yeah, you was building up to get there though.
Yeah. Any real preacher, by the time they get to their initial sermon, it's their first public sermon. It's not their first sermon.
Right. Absolutely.
So I had 6 years of, again, preparing a Bible lesson with the attempt to try to be as sound and as responsible with it as possible.
Yes, sir.
And so by the time I got to my first sermon, it made a difference.
Yes, sir. So when you started preaching and when you were starting to grow in preaching, did you ever feel that pressure? You know, some pastors' sons who come after them sometimes say they feel this type of pressure or the pressure that people may put on them. Did you ever feel that kind of pressure, or was it more or less is that your father was instilling you just be your own person?
I can't say I felt pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Main reason why I didn't feel any pressure is because my dad was known, but he wasn't big.
Right.
So there was no pressure to step into big shoes.
Yes, sir.
He didn't pastor a mega church. It was a small church on the east side of Detroit. Somewhat obscure, but not completely obscure.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, there wasn't pressure from the standpoint of having to live up to these big shoes. It was more so I pressured myself to want to excel in this preaching arena in Detroit. I wanted, it's almost like, it's almost the equivalent of saying, I challenged myself to just be the best that I could be at all times.
Yes, sir.
My father still, he still checked me.
Yes, sir.
Oh yeah. He still checked me. Even when I thought I did well, he still, hey, you should have did this. Here's something for you to consider, or don't do this. So there was always a self-induced pressure. I didn't have the external pressure of the ministry.
Right.
I had the internal pressure of the minister.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So as you're growing and you're starting to, were you getting opportunities after your first sermon?
Oh yeah.
So how was that? How were you growing? Your preparation, your preaching, if you even had the opportunity to, because your name was getting called all the time.
Listen now.
Were you just a little outline?
Listen to me. Listen to what I'm telling you. I preached my first sermon on the fourth Sunday in August of 1997. The next Sunday, 7 days later, was the fifth Sunday in August. I was in somebody else's pulpit that next Sunday.
Yes, sir.
So that's why I'm saying the Lord was fast tracking me.
Yes, sir.
So I preached my first sermon in August of 97. 6 months later, I was being ordained.
Wow.
February of 1998, 6 months later, I was being ordained in an ordination service. I was already doing revivals within my first year of being a preacher. Like, bro, that was back when we was doing 5 nights. I didn't have 5 sermons. Man, I'm at work. I still had a vocational job, bro. Like, I'm sitting in the office, bro, writing because I got a revival coming up. One of my dad's boys, like, man, come preach, son, come preach this revival. Man, I ain't even got 5 sermons. So God was fast tracking me.
Yes, sir.
So just follow this timeline now.
Yes, sir.
First sermon, August 97. 6 months later, I'm being ordained in 1998. In 1999, I get married. And 2 years later, in 2001, I'm being installed in my first church. So, and within 97 to 01, I'm doing meetings, I'm doing revivals. I was like the main preacher of a revival when I wasn't even a pastor.
Wow.
And then I was up for another church in Detroit, and that fell through. And then I was up again for New St. Paul, and they accepted me as their pastor in February of 2001. So God was fast tracking me.
So talk to us about that. How you got to New St. Paul, especially now that you say you were up for another church. Well, talk to us about that experience.
January the 1st, 1999. January the 1st, 1999. It fell on a Sunday. That's when January 1 fell on a Sunday.
Wow.
My friend and brother was a pastor of New St. Paul at the time.
Okay, yes, sir.
He asked me to come on the first Sunday of the year to come preach at his church. I'm like, man, no. What pastor is not going to stand
right
on January 1?
Right. Right.
First Sunday of the year.
First Sunday, right.
So I'm like, bro, you sure? He's like, yeah, man, just come. Everything is cool. Everything is cool. Just come. So I asked my dad, because I'm not about to go anywhere without his permission. And it's the first Sunday of the year. It's January 1. Wow. So I go to this church, I preach, and as God would have it, the first Sunday in January 2000, I am back at this same church.
Wow.
1 year later. The difference is he was no longer the pastor of the church a year later. Okay? And in 2000, they didn't have a pastor. So they asked me to come every first Sunday of the month in the year of 2000 because they appreciated how I handled communion.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Dad permitted me to go. February of 2001, they said, hey, we want you to be the pastor. So
Wow.
I had literally preached at this church every first Sunday in the year of 2000.
Wow.
When I technically started there on the first Sunday of 1999.
1999. Wow.
Yeah. So technically from 1999 to 2014, I had been at that church, New St.
Wow.
Paul, every first Sunday since January of 1999 to begin the year. That's what I'm saying. To begin.
And this is without them. Did they even form a search committee?
Oh
Anything?
yeah. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. In 2000, they formed a search committee. They went through the typical Baptist church format of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it came down to me and another guy. And as God would have it, the guy called the week of their vote and said, take my name out of it.
Wow.
And they made a decision to call me the pastor.
Wow.
Yeah. 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 So, God was ordering that thing, and let me be controversial.
Oh, please.
Just for a tad bit. A church knows whether they want you or not after 2 times of hearing you.
Yes, sir.
They know. They got that process going on, which is a bit of a soapbox for me, so I'm going to stay away from that. But after 2 times of hearing you, they know whether they want to hear you every Sunday or not. Mm-hmm. They don't need to hear you 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 times to know whether they want you to be the pastor or not. They've already made that decision after the 2nd time of hearing you. Mm-hmm. The first time was an icebreaker. The 2nd time, okay, there's some consistency here. All right, I really want this dude. So a lot of times that process is just that. It's a process. Mm-hmm. They've already made their decision after the 2nd time.
Yes, sir. And so, my goodness, it's so many ways I can go with this, but just talk to us about that. You at New St. Paul, those 14 years, your first years, just the experience, but also help us as well. Help any of us. What are some things that you learned, maybe some mistakes you made that you can help us about when you first got called? Just the growth, just that whole tenure. Just summarize it any way you desire.
In retrospect, I wish I would have pursued my theological education earlier. That's one thing I would encourage any young pastor. While you are naturally young, go after your theological education. And let me be very clear. A degree doesn't make you a preacher.
Yes, sir.
A degree doesn't automatically say you can preach.
Yes, sir.
A degree says you can start a project and finish one. Mm-hmm. The degree says you have met the required amount of hours for this objective. It says you can start something and you can finish it. Number 2, a degree expands your toolbox.
Yes, sir.
But it doesn't make you a carpenter.
My goodness.
It just expands your toolbox. Preaching still boils down to what the Holy Spirit does in the life of the preacher. But the Holy Spirit is not going to do what you can do. He's going to do what you can't do. That's first thing. Secondly, as a young pastor, personal discipline is very important.
Yes, sir.
You're not perfect. You're not going to make every right decision, either personally or pastorally. But to be conscious of personal discipline, of how you handle your body, how you handle your rest, how you handle your family, how you handle your money.
Help us, help us,
You
help
know,
us.
don't get your little anniversary money and the first thing you don't go do is go buy a car or run to the mall and go get all the name brand stuff and you don't have any money in the bank. It's personal discipline like that. Start preparing for the end at the beginning.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just your personal discipline. And then the other thing is being at New St. Paul really developed my prayer life.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it really developed my prayer life. I often am challenged, and I've shared this in other settings like this with pastors, is, what's going on at your church that's challenging the pastor's prayer life?
Wow.
What's going on at your church that keeps the pastor at the altar?
Yes, sir.
Because we're quick to pull people to the altar. But what's pulling the pastor to the altar?
Wow. Wow.
What's happening at your church that's causing you as the pastor to grow in your faith and in your prayer time and in your own walk with God? You are being used of God to develop other people's faith in God. But what is happening in your church that's developing your faith in God? And
mercy.
If there's nothing happening at your church that is causing your faith as the pastor to mature, then more than likely you're not busy in ministry.
Wow.
You're not doing nothing for God that's meaningful.
Wow.
So New St. Paul,
wow,
helped develop my personal prayer life.
Yes, sir.
On a variety of things, just things that might have been going on with me personally, things that might have been going on with me pastorally. I got to that church, and when I got there, the membership wasn't just big. But within a year, my first year there, we took in 900 people.
Woo!
In a building that only seated 350.
Wow.
Comfortably.
So how did you maintain? So I'm assuming y'all had to go to multiple services.
Go to multiple services. Had to go to multiple services, and let me put it to you this way. It doesn't. There's no demand on you if your church isn't growing. If your church is growing, your faith got to grow with it. Your walk with God got to grow with it. This church was busting at the seams. And, I'm in a query like, okay, God, do we build? Do we find another building? Now, here's the problem. I was the 6th pastor of the church in 60 years. I was the sixth pastor of the church in 60 years, and they had been at this one location 30 plus years.
Wow. Yes, sir.
Right. So there was a historical basis there. Watch this. That I didn't necessarily interrupt, God did. So when ministry, people, all of us want our ministries to grow, well, we presume all of us want our ministries to grow, because there are some people in a church that don't want to see it grow.
Absolutely.
Let's just be honest about that. There are some people in a church who do not want to see that church grow. But when God starts to grow it, the task now is to keep up with God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, God, what's next? Now that we got these people in here, what's next? What's next? Like, what am I supposed to do now?
Right.
So you have to that church taught me, it galvanized my faith personally.
Yes, sir.
And so after 7 years of being at that location, we finally relocated to another building. We didn't build, but we relocated to another building.
Okay.
That was 4 buildings on 8 acres of land.
Okay.
So we went from a sanctuary that seated about 350, 400 comfortably.
Yes, sir.
To a sanctuary that seated 1,000.
Wow. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
With 3 other buildings on 8 acres of land.
Wow. Yes.
So in my 14 years, it was 7 years at the first location and another 7 years at the location we moved to.
Yes, sir.
So when you're moving like that, and when God is doing those kinds of things, the question becomes not what is happening that's challenging the people's faith. What is happening at your church that's challenging the pastor's faith?
Yes, sir.
What keeps the pastor at the altar?
Mm. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Morgan, well, let me ask you this question then. As you said that with growth, talk to us then about pastors who, in a sense, may not see they're doing the work, they're serving, preaching hard, teaching hard. They may not necessarily see the numerical growth, but does that necessarily mean that their ministry still is not effective? Because even though we may not see the numerical growth, there may still be another side of growth that God is doing that we, in a sense, may not always see or appreciate.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because spiritual growth is actually more important than numerical growth.
Yes, sir.
And if your church is growing spiritually, then that's still an area of faith that has to be challenging the pastor, because now you got to worry about what is God doing spiritually, or where this church is going. Watch me. That may challenge where the church has been spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still an area that requires the pastor to be at the altar, to willingly submit to whatever God is doing spiritually in the life of the church. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. And so then talk to us about how you got from Detroit to now where you currently are in Warner Robins, Georgia.
Man, listen. This is literally what happened. The whole time, not gonna say the whole time. That's not true. Not the whole time. But at different moments during my 14 years at New St. Paul, other churches did entertain the idea of me coming to be their pastor.
Yes, sir.
They got word about what was happening at New St. Paul, or they were familiar with my ministry. And in the words of modern day colloquialism, they shot their shot, bro. They shot their shot, man. So most people don't know that Fellowship was not the first church that entertained the idea of me becoming their pastor.
Yes, sir.
They were the third church.
Wow. Yes, sir.
The third church.
Yes, sir.
And the other two churches were actually larger
Mm.
than Fellowship.
Mm.
So, man, I'm 13 years into New St. Paul. And one July, me and my wife are literally sitting at home, we're literally in the basement watching TV. And I got a call from the chair of deacons from Fellowship. Never met him before, never spoke to him before. And he was like, man, this is so-and-so, I'm not going to mention his name, but this is so-and-so calling from Fellowship Bible Baptist Church. Got your name from another pastor. Here's our situation. Would you be interested? Immediate answer, no. New St. Paul's growing. Still growing. No, I'm good. A few months went by, and I had to go preach in Atlanta at Pastor Kerwin Lee's church for their Pastors and Leaders Conference. The guy I was on the phone with
was there.
Was in the service. He calls me the next day. He said, hey, man, the Lord blessed us last night. God be praised. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, if you were to leave your church, what would it take? Now, that's a different question. That's not the same question. That's not the same question you asked me a few months ago. Now, that's a different question. Yeah, that's not the same question, but so, man, I'm literally like, and this guy's being aggressive. I'm like, bro, I said, listen, if I was to leave my church, you can judge me later. But if I was to leave my church, it would have to be a financial advancement for me and my family.
Yes, sir.
Y'all can say I'm money hungry all y'all want to.
Right.
But let me put it to you in your context. When the members of your church come to you and say, Pastor, the Lord done answered prayer. He done blessed me with a new job, and I got to relocate to California. Man, I want you to pray for me. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to pray for them. You're going to be excited for them because they're going to take themselves and their money.
Yep. And
go to that advancement because they believe that advancement is a move of God. And everybody in life wants advancement.
Right.
Well, guess what?
Yep.
If you're going to talk about moving me out of my hometown from this situation, that's what it's going to have to be.
Mm-hmm.
So when I said that, I'm thinking Yeah, he ain't gonna want to be bothered with this. I'm thinking, he ain't gonna want to be bothered with this. Man, that dude started rambling off numbers.
Oh Lord.
Right there on the phone.
Oh Lord.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Started rambling off numbers. And he said these words. He said, I've addressed your concern. Now you go talk to God.
Woohoo!
Yes, sir. He said, I've addressed your concern. But now you go talk to God about whatever else you need to talk about. Because if you address money to me, that's part been taken care of.
Oh, my Lord.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. When I tell you he was gangster towards me, bro.
Clearly.
Oh, he was gangster, Doc. Oh, he was gangster.
But as you can see,
yeah, and so he told me to go do the one thing I didn't want to do, and that is talk to God about it.
Yes, sir.
So when I went in prayer, the Lord broke me.
Yes, sir.
He said, number one, I've been throwing this at you for some time, and you've turned down them first two. Because the will of the Lord is you got to move on. I know what has happened at New St. Paul. I know you love these people. I know you love this church, but that's not your church. That's my church.
Yes, sir.
Your assignment is done here. You got to move on.
Yes, sir.
And the second thing he broke me on is that, son, if I've used you to be a blessing to other people, why do you think I won't bless you?
Wow.
All that stuff you preach and teach to other people, why do you think I won't do that in your life? And when I heard those two things from God, it broke me, bro. So I went to go tell my wife, you know, I really sense God has given me the green light to move on. And my wife said these words. She said, babe, I've been waiting on this.
Wow.
When are we leaving? And where are we going?
Wow. Wow.
So at that point, Brown, what I did was I started documenting moments where God was confirming what he had revealed to me in my phone. And in my phone right now, I have 9 documented moments where people was talking to me, but they didn't know what they was talking about. They knew who they were addressing. They just didn't know what they were addressing. And so that's when I knew, all right, God is confirming this and it's time to move. So time passed. That was 2014. Coming into 2015, coming into 2015, I went, saw the church for the first time, did a brief interview with them, and I preached one sermon. And they said, we'll take him. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay. Yeah, so that was it. And I've been there ever since. So that's why I tell people, you know, don't judge God by how he did it in my life, but be very clear. If it's in God's will and it's meant to be, it doesn't take 7, 8, 9, 10 sermons for people to figure out whether they want you or not. They know after that second time whether they want you or not. Absolutely.
Powerful. Listen, I just have a couple more questions because I know you've been so gracious with the time, and I know you're busy, so I don't want to hold you up.
No worries.
But this is so rich. This is so powerful. And you've been at Fellowship Bible 9 years, and let me just say you've done a phenomenal job. The Lord has used you mightily, and we all across the country see it. How have you been able to continue to keep that momentum as new people are coming in, as you've done the upgrades, if you've done this and that, even during COVID, but the Lord has allowed you to still be able to do great things, and just keeping that momentum going in the midst of your preaching stuff. How have you just been able to keep that momentum flowing?
I've literally been blessed with a church that is intentional about making my job easier.
Yes, sir.
They told me that coming in the door. Our job is to make your job easier. And I owe that to my predecessor, the late Dr. Willie L. Reed.
Mm-hmm.
He was the founder of the church. I'm coming behind the founding pastor. And he did an excellent job of, number one, discipling these people.
Yes, sir.
But number two, helping them to be a pastor-led church.
Mm-hmm.
There are some churches that are not a pastor-led church. They are a people-led church.
Yes.
I've been blessed to pastor a pastor-led church. And with that, they work with me. They don't, it's a military town too. So they understand order and protocol. They understand, rank, and so they govern themselves accordingly as relates to pastoral leadership. There are some churches that they are just pastor-led churches, and I've been blessed to pastor a pastor-led church. So with the context of pastoring, teaching, leading with our staff, leading with our sub-tier leadership groups, and having an itinerary, these people work with me to make sure that the church never intentionally slips as a result of all of these moving parts. So it's not so much my leadership skills, it's their fellowship skills.
Yes, sir.
When you've got people who are willing to work with you, in light of all that you do for ministry, we can look at any pastor that has a ministry outside of their church, and then you look back at their church and their church is strong. That's because of their staff and their people and their leadership. These people partner with the pastor to make sure that the church continues to either stay progressive, stay steady, or stay growing internally. Again, when we talk about growth, we're not talking about just numerical, but just order, organization, protocol, fellowship. That has to be the intent of the body and not just the pastor.
Yes, sir. And so, how do you balance? Because you're definitely an itinerant preacher, a heavy itinerant preacher. How do you balance being the itinerant preacher and being the husband and father? Because I think a lot of people, that would help a lot of people, because sometimes people have their ministries, but also their family. But sometimes, as we look at statistics and stuff, sometimes family can be neglected for ministry. Sometimes also getting the church to understand, before this person was pastor, they were husband, father as well. So,
Right.
how do you balance that?
You have to determine your priorities.
Yes, sir.
You have to determine your priorities. All of that it boils down to what is priority to you.
Yes, sir.
The church don't have to prioritize your family. You do.
Absolutely.
The church doesn't have to prioritize itself. You do.
Mm-hmm.
So when you determine your priorities, then you can determine your calendar.
Mm.
Yeah. When you determine your priorities, then you can determine your calendar.
Yes, sir.
You can determine where you need to be. What's my kid's schedule? What's my wife's schedule? All right. Check that. What's the church's schedule? All right. Check that. Now we can talk about so and so has invited you to do such and such for whatever service. I am available or I'm not. So that's how that happens. And your scheduling is a result of what you prioritize.
Mm. And then also talk to us about as you are growing, as you continue to look at ministry now, as you look around, as you see, generations, your generation, younger generation, talk about some of the things that encourage you, maybe discourage you, or just how do you deal, or how you just what do you see where we can improve, us young preachers, young pastors, how can we continue to improve?
Well, I'm glad to report that I'm actually encouraged by what I'm seeing across the country. And what I'm seeing is there is a growing appetite in the spirit of young pastors and preachers to actually pursue theological education that grounds them so that they can continue to work towards being responsible preachers. I'm encouraged by that. I don't have a negative outlook about the church, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
I'm encouraged. The problem is most people don't see what I just said because social media and its platform is not welcoming of what I'm saying right now.
Mhm.
Social media welcomes sound bites, scandals, and click tracks for bumping and shouting.
Yes, sir.
That's the portrait that social media paints of the church. But aside from that, in places where I've gone across the country, I'm seeing preachers like yourself who, one, are entering the pastorate with a sense of sincerity about being the most responsible pastor teacher I can be. I'm seeing that all across the country. So I don't have a negative outlook about the church. Um, I'm optimistic that that will continue, and one day that will be more important than the social media picture of the church.
And help us as well, as you are at Fellowship Bible. You say you're the second pastor there. Help
Mhm.
us with that as well, about following your predecessor, following a leader, because sometimes people struggle with this, and sometimes, as you say, it can be a competition of predecessor, successor. But talk to us about the healthy way to be your own person while still not diminishing the work of the predecessor.
Um, I walked into a church where the only voice they've ever heard was the founding pastor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that meant several things to me. Number one, if they're going to embrace me, I need to love who they love.
Yes, sir.
Number
Yes, sir.
two, when I got there, they said, "Man, you got some big shoes to fill." I mean, because this guy built a mega church for this area. I mean, our church is 7 buildings on 56 acres of land.
Wait, how many acres?
56.
Wow.
So they were like, "Hey, man, you got some big shoes to fill." And my response was, "I'm not going to fill his shoes, but I am going to shine them."
Mm. Say that again for everybody. Please say that again for everybody.
You don't have to fill their shoes, just shine them.
Lord have mercy today. Mm.
So I'm going to make sure we seed into his widow. I renamed one of the buildings after him. I put up a whole mural wall that captures his sayings, his picture. We have given honor to his children. And I regularly reference him. So I'm not going to fill his shoes, but I'm going to shine them.
Woo!
Because I'm standing on this man's shoulders. Now keep in mind, I never met him. Never shook his hand. They built the dome in 2011. He dies in 2012. I came in 2015. How is it going to hurt me to honor him when everything I'm working with, he built?
Wow.
No. I'm going to shine his shoes. I'm not going to fill them. His shoes can't be filled.
Talk.
Cannot be filled, but they can be shined. And I'm going to lead the charge in shining them.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to love who they love. And I'm secure enough to do it. Because after a while, they just might love me. And that's how you do that. You don't feel the shoes, you shine them. One day, you might become that old preacher. And I think on some regard, we have to teach people how to treat preachers. Preachers have to lead people in how to honor preachers. So that's not a challenge for me. And this is the bigger picture, G. Chris. My father came behind the founding pastor at the church he pastored in Detroit. So I watched him, how he treated that man's widow until she lived to be 100 years old. So in the providence of God, God was already prepping me for fellowship by watching my daddy handle Faith Temple and how he came after the founding pastor and how he took care of that man's widow. So when I stepped into these same circumstances, I already knew what to do. True story, bro. True story.
Ain't nothing I can do because that is so helpful. That is so rich. Like others have said, that's so rich. Because what you just said is also so true about shining. Oh my goodness, shining shoes.
Yeah.
But also that I think it's important. And you talked about this on a Facebook post you shared the other day. That's what inspired me also to reach out to you because I want to anyway about pastors, young preachers, young pastors respecting older pastors, but also I also believe there has to be because I talk to my pastor about this all the time. There does have to be that type of balance and connection between the two, to where younger pastors should always respect older pastors because they paved the way. But
Absolutely.
I also believe that older pastors should also spend time with us to see where we are and why we have our own thoughts as well, just as if we respect you. So how do you feel that gap needs to be meshed or can be meshed between the two, generations?
Dr. A.R. Bernard put it this way. He said that succession should be a collaboration and not a collision. So when it comes to this bridging the gap between the seasoned pastor and the fresh pastor, there does need to be a give and take. My post was particularly to encourage the young pastor to understand two things. Number one, if the seasoned pastor takes time to deal with you in any way, be grateful.
Absolutely.
Number two, when the seasoned pastor speaks to you, whether it's to criticize or whether it's to celebrate or whether it's to correct or whether it's to confirm, they want you to last.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's not to tear you down, but they want you to last.
Mm-hmm.
So my post had some contingencies there.
Absolutely.
This is not universal.
Mm-hmm.
This is if the seasoned pastor takes time with you, that's the condition. Be grateful, because that means they see something in you that is of potential, that is meaningful, that they may not see in somebody else, or that they may not even be called or drawn to. Every seasoned pastor is not drawn to every young preacher.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got your pastor that speaks into your life. I got my pastor that speaks into my life, and so on and so on.
Absolutely.
If you have a seasoned pastor that takes time with you for any reason, be grateful, because they don't have to do that. Now, on the flip side of that, I think the young pastor has to understand, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I'll be all right. When it comes to the seasoned pastor, why do you feel like the seasoned pastor needs to listen to you? Why do you feel like the seasoned pastor needs to hear your perspective on ministry? That's not the purpose of it. It's not a sharing. It really isn't. It's let me draw this wisdom, right, and appropriate it properly, because I'm going forward and they're only going to their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this expectation to have this shared, I'll listen to you if you listen to me. No. To this day, I have mentors. When I come into their presence, I'm not trying to talk. And I'm about to be 50 years old. I've been preaching 27 years. When I come into their presence, I'm not talking. They're going to talk. I'm going to listen. And I'll let them tell me, hey, man, how are you doing such and such? What do you do about this? I saw you do this at your... If they don't mention that, I'm not coming into my mentor's presence trying to coach him. But let me go ahead on and get in trouble here. That's the difference between somebody who wants a pastor for clout versus somebody who actually wants to be fathered.
Wow. Wow.
No son comes into the presence of their daddy to coach him.
My God, my God, my God.
No son comes into the presence of their father to tell their father what to do.
Woo.
That's up to the father to look at that son or daughter and say, hey, how did you do that? What do I need to do? If they don't ever ask that, that's not the concern. I'm coming into your presence to glean. I'm not coming to give unless you just ask me. I never went into my daddy's presence to try to tell him how to pastor his church. Watch this. And I didn't agree with everything he said or did, but that's daddy. And if I don't like it, I'm going to shut up or get out. But your kid's not about to come into your presence and tell you how to parent. Not if they respect you. So it's not this I'll let him mentor me if he listens to me. You hear this, seniors and pastors need to listen to us too. No, they don't. No, they don't. Unless they want to. You need them more than they need you. And I'm pretty sure don't nobody want to hear this right now. But the truth of the matter is, if that's really my pastor and really my mentor, I'm not coming into their presence to give them anything. I'm coming into their presence to glean. Now, if they want to glean from me, then that's different. Let them initiate that. But if that's truly my pastor, my father in the ministry, my mentor, I'm coming in your presence, I'm going to shut up. And listen now, I have mentors whose churches aren't as large as mine. I don't care about that when I come in their presence. I care about, sir, what do you have to say that's going to make me a better pastor and a better man? I'm not coming to give you nothing. I'm coming to receive. Pastor Pop Ray, Frank Ray always says this. He says, mice run through holes that are made by rats. In other words, the route you're trying to go, that you've been through, somebody bigger than already made that hole. So all of this, you want to have a voice with your mentors. You want to go in there and shut up. Let them talk. Because one day you're going to be the senior pastor. You're going to be the senior preacher. And some young person is going to want to come in your presence. And you're going to want to have to be responsible for speaking into their lives. Because if they see something in you, they want you to last. They're not trying to tear you down. They want you to last. Now, they might have unique ways of saying it.
Right.
They want you to last. They want you to last.
I love how you said that, because I'm grateful for my relationship with my pastor, Dr. E.W. Bryan from Oklahoma City, Wildwood Baptist Church. And we talk every week. But most of the times we're talking, I'm listening. Now, as you say, he may ask me an opinion, but other than that, even when I go back to Oklahoma City, when I fly back home, I'm always making sure me and him I'm always going to make sure he's available so I can go, whether that's at his office, go to his house, which we normally do. But I'm just sitting there talking, listening to him, asking questions, because that's my pastor. I call him my second dad. That's just my guy. And other mentors as well. So what you just said hit home for so many of us, is that's true. When we have these mentors who really love us, they do want us to last.
Right. They're gonna tell you stuff not to make you happy, but to make you last. Their job is not to make you happy. It's to make you last.
Yes, sir.
Your job with your kids is not to make them happy. It's to empower them to be, watch this, it's to empower them to live life without you. Every good parent gets their kids ready for life without the parent. That's a job. Get your kids ready for life without you.
Wow.
That's not about making you happy. That's about making you responsible. That's about challenging you to think. That's about doing everything possible so that you will last.
Well, Dr. Morgan, I just have to say thank you for your time. Listen, is there anything else on your heart that you want to share? Because I've taken up enough of your time, but I just thank you for your availability. Anything else on your heart you want to share with us?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity today to have this time of sharing. And I pray that something was said and shared during the course of our discourse today that will, help a brother or sister in the faith personally, in their preaching, in their pastoring. At this juncture, I appreciate you for this platform and for this discussion that we've shared. So just be encouraged and continue to make God happy.
Well, I appreciate it. Also, give people information about the church you fellowship Bible, and let them know in case they're ever in the area. Let them know that as well.
Yeah, we're at the Fellowship Bible Baptist Church in Warner Robins, Georgia. We are in the geographical center of the state of Georgia. And if you're ever in the area and you want to worship with us, look us up on anything, anything, and we'll be more than happy to leave the light on for you and worship Jesus with you.
Well, listen, God bless you all. I'm going to ask Dr. Morgan to stay on for just a quick second after we end this stream. But listen, God bless you all. Thank you all once again, as always, for another Clergy Conversation. Continue to like, comment, and share. And I know I've been blessed just like you have been blessed. So God bless you, and God keep you is our prayer. And we look forward to seeing you next time.